So I figured it out. I never post on Tuesday because I have like 4 things to do on Tuesday evenings, and I'm always too tired to read. And then on Wednesday, I, forget. I know you're surprised. Because I never forget anything, right? Yeah. So I've decided that I'm going to change from Tuesday to Monday. So if you want to keep watching on Tuesday, you can do that. Or you can watch on Monday. It's up to you. And actually, if you are still watching, it would be awesome if you would leave me a comment because I feel a little bit lonely. I feel like I'm reading to myself. So on Mondays, tune in for a new chapter or possibly 2 chapters so that we can hurry up and finish this book. And leave me a comment. Yeah. So here's chapter 12. Remember, in chapter 11, we had just caught an elf who was following them. So in chapter 12, they ask many questions. Here we go. We looked at each other and then at the elf. What you can do, said Shiera, is answer some questions. Oh, look, questions. My dear lady, I would be delighted, the elf said. What do you want to know? Why were you following us? The dragon rumbled. I thought she was asking the questions, the elf said. We're all asking questions, Shiera told him, so you can just stop dodging and answer that one. What one? The elf said. The dragon growled and made a snapping motion at the elf, who jerked back hastily. Yes, of course, he said. That question. I was, looking for information. Information? Ha! Said Shiera. What kind of information? She's good at this. Who you are, where are you going, and what you're going to do when you get there, the elf replied promptly. He was pointedly not looking at the dragon. That's all, Shiera said sarcastically. It sounds a lot like what we want to know about you. How nice, the elf said, beaming. We have something in common. Excuse me, I broke in, but who exactly are you? Excuse me. The elf looked at me with a pained expression. I'm an elf. I can see that, I said politely, but would you mind telling me your name? I mean, I'd sort of like to know to whom I'm speaking. My dear boy, I would be delighted. The elf rose and bowed with a flourish. My name, he said, is General. That's Janril. General. He didn't say that. I'm just telling you. Yes. Okay. He sat down again and looked at me expectantly. Pleased to meet you, General, I said. This is Shiera. That's Night Witch. I hesitated a moment. Dragons don't pick their names until they're old enough to pick what sex they're going to be, so whether they're a boy or a girl. And I wasn't quite sure how to introduce one. I couldn't leave it out, though. This is a dragon, somehow I guessed, the elf muttered. And I'm Daystar, I finished. Shiera was frowning at me, but before she could say anything, the elf bounced to his feet and said, Daystar? Not Cimmerine's son. My dear boy, I can't tell you how glad I am you've finally come. It's about time things got straightened out a little. I don't trust elves, Shiera said, and why should we listen to you anyway? My dear girl, if you expect me to answer questions, you're going to have to listen to me, said the elf. Otherwise, there's no point in it. Why don't you trust elves? Shiera didn't want to tell him anything, but I was beginning to like him. Also, I didn't see any good reason not to explain, so I told him about the first elf and the wizard's staff. When I finished, General nodded solemnly. That, he said, makes your position entirely understandable. I'm afraid that you ran into one of the dark morning elves. They're a rather disreputable lot. That means that they're kind of no good. They've been running wild since the king disappeared, so of course they'd cause you trouble. Why, of course, said Shiera suspiciously, and what king are you talking about? The king of the enchanted forest, the elf said. The dark morning elves don't want him to come back. They like the way things have been run since he disappeared. Since you have his sword, of course they want to get rid of you. If they can, he added thoughtfully. Personally, I don't really think they know what they're doing. How do you know about Daystar's sword? Shiera said. My dear girl, everyone who lives in the enchanted forest knows something about the vanished king's sword, Daniel said. Wait a minute, I said. I only have one sword, and I thought it was called the sword of the sleeping king. Sleeping, vanished, run away. What difference does it make? He's gone. I don't care about the sword, the dragon said. I want to know why you were following us. The elf looked annoyed. My dear, dragon, he said. I told you already. I wanted to find out more about you. I believe that's the usual reason for following people around. But that doesn't explain anything, the dragon complained. Shiera's eyes narrowed suddenly. All right then, why did you want to know more about us? General considered for a moment, then grinned reluctantly. Because I'm trying to find out what the Dark Morning Elves are up to. What does that have to do with us? I asked. If I knew that, I wouldn't have to follow you, the elf said reasonably. But the Dark Morning Elves have been very active in this part of the woods for the past few days, and we thought it might be you they were interested in. And, of course, if they're interested, so are we. Who do you mean by we? I said. There are a lot of questions in this chapter. The Goldwing Shadow Music Elves, General said with a touch of pride. We are on the side of the king, even if he is missing right now. We follow the sword. What does that mean? Shiera demanded. And how many kinds of elves are there? Quite a few, said General, but the only ones you have to watch out for are the Dark Morning Elves and the Silverstaff Elves. Fortunately, the Silverstaff Elves don't know the sword is back yet, but I doubt that your luck will hold much longer. Sorry, I'm parched. How do you know these Silverstaff Elves don't know about Daystar's sword? Shiera asked. My dear girl, if they did, you'd have wizards all over the place. The Silverstaff Elves are in league with them. Undiscriminating, that's all I can call it. General looked prim. A prim elf is almost as odd-looking as a dignified lizard. Prim and dignified are kind of synonyms. I found myself wishing Suz were around so I could compare them. How do we know you're telling the truth? Shiera said. I suppose you don't, the elf said cheerfully, but it doesn't really matter. We'll still be glad to help you. Shiera snorted. The last elf who said he was going to help us almost got Daystar killed. I'm sorry about that, General said politely, but I simply can't take responsibility for the Dark Morning Elves. Now, I must be going. I have to let the rest of the Golden Wing Shadow Music Elves know what's going on. We'll see you at the castle. Just a minute, Shiera said. What makes you think we're going to let you go? Can you think of anything else we could do with him? I said. I could eat him, I suppose, the dragon said dubiously. That means, doubtfully. He doesn't think he's a good idea. I don't think I want to, though. Elves don't taste very good. I decided not to ask how the dragon knew that. You don't have to eat him, I said. I think we should let him go. But Daystar... Shiera stopped and thought for a moment, biting her lip. Oh, all right. If you want to let him go, let's do it. Are you sure? I said, surprised. I thought you didn't like the idea. I don't, Shiera said, glaring at me. But we'll be here all day if we start arguing. Besides, it's your sword. All right, I said to General. You can go as long as you don't follow us around anymore. But of course! The elf bounced to his feet again, bowing to each of us, including Night Witch, and whisked off. Shiera scowled after him and opened her mouth, then apparently decided not to say anything. Well, let's go, I said after a minute. We picked up our bundles and started walking again. The dragon and I both watched the trees for a while, but General kept his promise. Shiera walked just behind the dragon, looking thoughtful. Do you really believe that elf? She finally asked me. I'm not sure, I said. I don't think it makes much difference, though. I'd still be going to see Kazal no matter what he said. I want to find out about this sword and what it does and what's really going on around here. I must have sounded annoyed because Shiera frowned at me and asked, What's the matter with you? I'm getting sort of tired of people chasing my sword, I said. I'd like to know why they want it so badly. I was also beginning to realize that I didn't know nearly as much about the Enchanted Forest as I thought I did, which made me very nervous. I wasn't going to mention that to Shiera just yet, though. Oh. Shiera looked thoughtful again. Well, you could. The dragon looked backwards over its shoulder. You're slowing down, it said. Can't you two talk and walk at the same time? We made fairly good time for the rest of the afternoon. We were just beginning to think about finding a place to spend the night when we came to a clearing. The dragon stopped right at the edge of it, very abruptly. Fortunately, Shiera and I were back far enough to stop before we ran into it or stepped on its tail or something. Bumping into a dragon is not a particularly good way to end a day. "What's the matter now?" said Shiera. "This looks just like the last clearing. Sorry, lost my accent. This looks just like the last clearing," the dragon said, "the one that had a castle in it." "You mean we've been going in circles?" Shiera said. "No," said the dragon. "I know my way around the enchanted forest better than that. I just don't like this." "Why are you worried?" Shiera said. "You're not the one who got turned into a statue." "Well, if you think banging into something you can't see is fun, you go first," said the dragon. I put my hand on the hilt of my sword and felt a nice strong rumble, like a cart full of bricks on a bumpy road. There was definitely, that was a really good simile. Listen again. Like a cart full of bricks on a bumpy road. That was nice. I like that. Okay. There was definitely a lot of magic in the clearing, or at least close by. I said so. "If it's invisible, I don't want anything to do with it," Shiera said decidedly. "Can't we just go around?" "No," said the dragon grumpily. "I want to know who's putting all these invisible things in my shortcut. If there's another one here, I'm going to find out about it." It stalked cautiously out into the clearing, heading straight through the middle. Nothing happened. The dragon walked all the way across, then turned and looked at us. "Are you sure there's something here? I can't find anything." I touched the sword again. "It feels like there is," I said. I looked at Shiera. She looked dubiously across the clearing. "Hurry up," said the dragon. I sighed and started forward. I kept one hand on the hilt of my sword just in case, and I walked across the same part of the clearing the dragon had. Shiera shook her head and started around the edge of the clearing. I got about 5 steps. Then there was a whooshing noise, and a wall of flames shot up around me, very hot and bright. I yelled because I couldn't see where I was going, and I yanked at my sword. I think I had some vague idea that the sword might keep me from burning to death. I certainly couldn't see to fight anything. Something hit me in the middle of my back just as the sword came out of its sheath. I felt a wave of anticipation from the sword, followed very closely by a surge of disappointment. I was so surprised I nearly dropped it. Then I realized that it wouldn't matter if I did drop it, because I was lying on the ground. I was also much cooler than I had been a minute ago, and someone was pounding on me. "Stop it," I said. The someone sat back, and I saw that it was Shiera. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I think so," I said. "Why were you pounding on me?" "Your clothes were on fire," she said. "I was trying to put them out. If I'd known you were going to fuss about it, I'd have let them burn." I apologized and thanked her, then looked around. Shiera and I were sitting on the ground just inside a ring of fire. In the center of the ring was a short, round building with a pointed roof. It wasn't quite tall enough to call a tower, but it wasn't short enough to call a house either. I moved away from the flames, which were uncomfortably warm, and looked at Shiera. "What happened?" "How should I know? One second you were walking across the clearing, and the next second there was all this fire and you were yelling," Shiera said. "And when I tried to shove you out of it, we both got in here instead, and that thing was sitting there." She waved at the not-quite tower. "At least it isn't invisible," I offered. Shiera gave me a disgusted look, but she didn't say anything. "Hello?" called the dragon's voice from the other side of the wall of fire. "Are you there?" "We're here," I called back, "both of us." "How did you do that?" the dragon shouted. "I don't know," I said, "and I don't want to stay here to find out." I picked myself up off the ground and put the sword back in its sheath. "I think maybe we better go," I said to Shiera, "before something comes out of that house." "It isn't a house," Shiera said, "but for once I agree with you." "Ah-choo!" said the dragon from the other side of the fire. "Just a minute there," a voice said behind me. I turned around. A medium-sized man was standing about 10 feet away, leaning on a staff that was about 3 feet taller than he was. He had black hair and 3 rings on each hand, and he was frowning irritably at Shiera and me. "Oh, rats," said Shiera disgustedly. "Another wizard." "You," said the man, ignoring her statement completely, "are trespassing. I don't know how you got in here, but it was a great mistake for you to do so." We didn't do it on purpose, I said. We were just trying to get across the clearing. Young man, I surround my home with a wall of fire for a reason, the wizard said, and the reason is that I do not like to be disturbed. I wish to know how you penetrated it, or I would not be wasting my time with you. I'm a fire witch, that's how, Shiera said, and if you don't want to be disturbed, you ought to be more careful with your stupid wall. We would have gone right by it if it hadn't jumped up all over Daystar when he tried to cross the clearing. A fire witch, the man said. He gave Shiera an extremely odd look. You haven't mislaid a castle recently, have you? No, said Shiera. It isn't mine. The wizard looked even angrier. You know of it. Well, sort of, I said. It isn't ours, but we ran into it this morning. Did you? Said the wizard. He sounded skeptical and very dangerous. I decided I didn't want to talk about the castle anymore. I think we ought to be going now, I said. We're really very sorry to have bothered you. I'm not, Shiera said. Shiera! Well, I'm not, she said. He ought to apologize to us, not the other way around. And anyway, I'm not apologizing to any wizard, especially not one that messes around with invisible castles. The man with the staff frowned, but this time he looked more thoughtful than angry. What is your complaint against wizards? Ha! Said Shiera. You should know. No, said the man. I should not. I am not a wizard. Achoo! Came the dragon's voice, and the wall of fire bulged inward on that side. Excuse me, but if you're not a wizard, why are you carrying a staff? I asked. And why is the dragon sneezing? The man started. Dragon? You travel with a dragon? No, it travels with us, I said. Does it make a difference? Perhaps, the man said. He looked at the wall of flames and made a pass with his staff. The flames began to die, and a moment later we could see the clearing again. And that is the end of chapter 12. Lucky for you, we're reading chapter 13 today too, so here we go. Chapter 13, in which they learn the difference between a wizard and a magician. The dragon was still sneezing in medium-sized puffs of flame. The man with the staff examined it and shook his head. That certainly is a dragon. He made another pass with his staff. The staff vanished, and the dragon stopped sneezing abruptly. It sniffed a couple of times in an experimental way, looking surprised, as if it expected to start sneezing again any minute. I was surprised too. I mean, wizards never let go of their staffs. Not willingly, anyway. The man bowed politely to the dragon. I apologize for inconveniencing you, he said. I offer you greetings and welcome to my home, and I wish you good fortune when you leave. What? Said the dragon. The man looked a little startled and peered at the dragon more closely. Oh, I see, he said after a moment. Well, you're welcome. Come and make yourself comfortable. Shiera scowled at him and bent to pick up Night Witch, who had come running toward her as soon as the flames had died. The dragon looked suspiciously at the man. I don't like wizards, it said, and I don't like people who put invisible things in the middle of my shortcut. I am not a wizard, the man said with a sigh, and my tower has been here for years, and it isn't invisible. Now, come in and talk. There hasn't been a dragon by for a long time, and I'm a bit behind on the news. If you're not a wizard, what are you? Shiera said, petting Night Witch and glaring at the man. I'm a magician, the man said, and my name is Tain. Pleased to meet you, I said. Row, said Night Witch, and started purring loudly. Tain looked at the kitten, and suddenly he began to laugh. He had a nice laugh, sort of deep and friendly. I started thinking that I might be able to like him after all, even if his firewall had nearly burned me to a cinder. I don't believe I've ever seen a group quite like this one, Tain said when he finished laughing. Please, tell me who you all are. I introduced everyone, and Tain nodded courteously to each of us. He gave me a sharp look when I told him my name. I thought that was what your friend called you, he said. Welcome to my home. Some welcome, Shiera said. You nearly got Daystar killed, and you started the dragon sneezing again, and how come the dragon was allergic to you if you aren't a wizard? Dragons aren't allergic to wizards, Tain said, sounding surprised. What gave you that idea? I did, the dragon said. It came forward and sat down emphatically, right next to me. All dragons, sorry, all dragons are allergic to wizards. I should know. I sneeze every time I get near one. It eyed Telemane belligerently. That means, like, wanting to fight. Oh, I don't doubt that at all, Telemane said. But the hypersensitive reaction results from the indiscriminate absorption of magical energy through the enchantments fixed in their staffs. What? Said the dragon. Telemane sighed. It's not the wizards you're allergic to, it's their staffs. You stopped sneezing as soon as I got rid of mine, didn't you? The dragon looked startled. I did, didn't I? It said after a minute. If you aren't a wizard, what are you doing with a wizard's staff? Shiera asked. Oh, that's a good question. Telemane raised his eyebrows. Why do you ask? We've been having some trouble with wizards, I said before Shiera could answer. I didn't want her to make him angry. We had enough people mad at us already. Really? Telemane looked as if he were going to laugh again. All of you? Well, mainly just Shiera and me, I said. We've been sort of worried about them. Most of them are after Shiera, I added. What would the Society of Wizards want with a fire witch? Telemane said. I can see that I shall have to invite you in, if only to hear your tale. How do you know about the society? Shiera said angrily, and why should we trust a wizard anyway? Anyone who knows much about magic can tell you're a fire witch, and the only reason I can think of for a fire witch to have several wizards after her is if she has done something to offend the Society of Wizards, Telemane said. He still sounded amused. And, for the third time at least, I am a magician, not a wizard. What's the difference? Shiera demanded. Magicians deal with many ways of magic, Telemane said. Wizards with only one. Now, will you come in and sit down? Shiera was still looking at him doubtfully. Telemane smiled. Will an oath content you? If you mean no harm, I am not your enemy, and I will do you no harm while you are my guests, save in self-defense. I swear by the sword. I felt a kind of popping at my side, even though I wasn't touching the sword, and a ripple ran through the clearing like a shimmer of light in the air. I thought it kept on going out into the forest, but I couldn't be certain. Shiera started and dropped Night Witch, who landed on her feet with a yowl. The dragon stretched its neck, looking almost as if it were trying to purr. Telemane suddenly looked very intense. That is the way of it, then, he said when the ripple passed. I don't think I blame you for your caution. He looked pointedly at my sword. That means, like... Shiera scowled again, but I thought she looked a little more doubtful than the last time. If you're so smart, she began and stopped. Night Witch was rubbing against Telemane's leg and purring. Night Witch, said Shiera. An intriguing name for a cat, Telemane said, bending over to pick up Night Witch. Even more interesting for a kitten. Where did you come by her? She was a present, Shiera said grudgingly, from a witch named... Morwen? Said Telemane. Night Witch purred louder. I suspected as much. Now, will you come in, or do you wish to continue this discussion where anyone may hear? We went in. The door of Telemane's home looked like an ordinary, normal-sized door, but it couldn't have been, because the dragon fit through it without any trouble. The room inside was made of stone and very bare. In the center of the floor, 2 iron staircases twisted around each other in a spiral and disappeared into the ceiling. The whole place seemed much taller from the inside. If I hadn't seen it before we came in, I would have been sure we were in a tower. As the door closed behind the dragon, Telemane waved his hand. A table and 3 chairs materialized beside the stairs. Sit down and tell me more about yourselves. We sat down, except for the dragon, who sort of curled itself around the edges of the room. Sorry. I started explaining about Mother and Antarel and everything that had happened in the Enchanted Forest. I even told him about the Sword of the Sleeping King, because I was pretty sure from the way he looked at it that he already knew something about it. The questions he asked made it pretty clear that I was right, although sometimes he got so technical that I had to ask him to repeat something. He sounded as if he knew exactly what answers he expected, too. When I told him about the voice that had said, "All hail the bearer of the sword," he nodded in satisfaction. Then I explained how Shiera and I had met, and why the wizards were after her, and about the one who tried to get us in the stream. Shiera frowned at me, but she didn't interrupt. When I told him about meeting Morwen, Telemaine seemed very interested. I haven't seen Morwen in a long time, he said. How is she? You know Morwen, Shiera said. We grew up together, Telemaine said. Now, exactly what did she have you do to repair the damage to your hand? Telemaine asked a lot of questions about the things the Sword of the Sleeping King had done, but he didn't seem particularly interested in the wizards. He wasn't interested in the princess at all. Then I told him about the invisible castle and the Fire Witch. So that's how you knew about it, Telemaine said. I wondered. That's how we knew, Shiera said. How did you know? The castle landed in my clearing sometime around noon, Telemaine said dryly. I was understandably curious as to why someone would go to all the trouble to make a castle invisible and then drop it on top of a magician who couldn't help noticing it. It's not there now, Shiera said. Of course not. What would I want with an invisible castle? When I found no one at home, I cleaned the place up a bit and got rid of it. Cleaned it up? I said, puzzled. The most recent owner had a number of unattractive habits, Telemaine said, even more dryly than before. In addition to casual petrification of passers-by, she indulged in 7 varieties of involuntary metamorphosis, as well as necromancy and demonology. I don't believe you would be at all interested in the technical details. Oh, he was right. I really didn't want to know about it. Telemaine looked at Shiera again. I owe you an apology, he said. I knew that the castle was the property of a fire witch, and I'm afraid that when you showed up, I thought you had some connection with it. Well, I don't, but I suppose I can see why you might have gotten mad. Shiera sounded a lot friendlier than she had before. I think she would have been friendly to anyone who didn't like that other fire witch. Then she frowned. How did the castle get into your clearing anyway? Telemaine shrugged. As far as I can tell, the unit transportation spell operated on a set of totally random parameters, both in terms of time and location. What does that mean? Said the dragon. The castle was designed to move around the enchanted forest more or less randomly. It's a rather unusual spell to put on a building, particularly an invisible one, because if you happen to be outside when it moves, you get left behind. Then why on earth would anyone put a stupid spell like that on a castle? Presumably this fire witch didn't expect to have any problems finding the castle again. I don't believe it ever occurred to her that someone else might find it first. He smiled. I left a few surprises for her. I doubt she'll be pleased. Oh, that's all right, the dragon said. Daystar got rid of her. Telemaine looked at me. Really? How did you manage that? She threw some sort of spell at me, but Night Witch scratched her so she missed, I said. And after that, I had the sword out. You used the Sword of the Sleeping King on a fire witch? Telemaine said. He sounded somewhere between shocked and horrified. I couldn't think of anything else that might work, I said apologetically. And it did work, sort of. I mean, it got rid of the fire witch. She went up in smoke, the dragon said with considerable satisfaction. I watched. She went up in smoke, Telemaine repeated in tones of fascination. And what were you doing while this was going on? I was trying to hang on to the sword, I said. It was glowing red, and my hands felt like they were burning or something, so it was hard to do, but as soon as the fire witch was gone, it stopped. You are extremely fortunate, Telemaine said. You might have gotten yourself killed and ruined everything. I don't recommend that you try that again. Stick to wizards. That's what the sword was meant for. It was? Said Shiera. How do you know? What else does it do? Telemaine looked at her. Magicians know many kinds of magic. He turned back to me. Please continue. I was curious about what the sword did too, but Telemaine obviously didn't want to talk about it, so I didn't ask. Instead, I explained about fixing Shiera and not finding the castle and meeting the second elf. Telemaine listened carefully, then shook his head. So the war is beginning again, he said, half to himself. I had best make my own preparations. I wonder why no one let me know. War? Shiera and I said together. Telemaine looked up, almost as if he had forgotten we were there. The war between the dragons and the wizards, he said, in the tones of someone trying to be patient. The dragon, who had been falling asleep, suddenly came awake. War with the wizards? It is obvious, Telemaine said, a trifle crossly. The elves are choosing sides, the dragons are restless, the wizards are coming into the enchanted forest in large numbers, and the sword of the sleeping king has returned. What more do you need to know? What does the sword of the sleeping king have to do with a war between the dragons and the wizards? I asked before the dragon could take offense. The sword is what started the war in the first place, Telemaine said, and then he refused to say anything more. If Cimmerian didn't see fit to explain, I certainly won't, he said. When you meet Kizil, I'm sure she will tell you what you need to know. I'm afraid I don't have time at the moment. I must see to things at once if we are to win this war at last. Who do you mean we? Shiera said suspiciously. The dragons, Telemaine said, and the rest of us who follow the sword. Now, if you will excuse me. He rose and started for the stairs. Wait a minute, Shiera said. What about us? What? Oh, of course, Telemaine said. He waved his hand again and muttered something, and suddenly the table was full of plates and bowls of food. I jumped. Telemaine didn't seem to notice. Help yourselves while I'm gone, he said. I don't expect to be long. He turned away and went up one of the iron staircases. Shiera and I looked at each other. Now what do we do? Shiera said. I'm going to eat, I said. Would you like something? Shiera snorted, but she reached for one of the bowls. There was plenty for all of us, including Nightwitch and the dragon. About the time we finished, Telemaine came back. I was right, he said to no one in particular. Then he looked at me. You'd better stay here for the night. It will be much safer for everyone, and it will give me some time to look into things a little more. You've been extremely lucky so far, but there's no reason to take more chances until you must. I started to nod. Then I looked at Shiera. Shiera looked at me, then at Nightwitch, who was curled in a small ball on Telemaine's chair. She shrugged. Let's stay. You will find rooms upstairs on the second floor, Telemaine said. Just pick one and go in. He turned to the dragon. I think you'll be more comfortable down here. I think you're right, said the dragon, eyeing the iron staircases a little dubiously. And thank you very much for your hospitality, I said. Telemaine nodded. Shiera and I started for the stairs. Shiera got there ahead of me and started climbing, but she didn't get anywhere. What's the matter? I asked. There's something wrong with this stupid staircase, Shiera said. I keep trying to climb up, but I don't go anywhere. Telemaine, who had been talking quietly to the dragon, turned. I'm sorry, I should have warned you. You'll have to take the other staircase. That one incorporates a unidirectional matrix focused groundward. Say that again in English, Shiera said. That stairway just works going down. That's ridiculous, said Shiera. How can a staircase only work in one direction? He's a magician, I said. We didn't have any trouble getting up the other stairway. Telemaine's tower really was a lot taller than it looked from the outside. The stairs kept going after they got to the second floor. Shiera and I did not climb any farther, though. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. We got off the landing at the second floor and looked around. We were standing on a narrow circle of wooden floor around a hole where the two staircases came through. Around the edge were 6 identical wooden doors. Well, he said, just go in, Shiera said. Each of us picked a door and opened it. The rooms were all the same and very comfortable looking. They each had a bed, a table, a lighted lamp in a bracket on the wall, a padded chair, and a small set of drawers with a mirror above it. Shiera looked thoughtful. I wonder if he keeps lights going in all these rooms. He might, I said. I mean, he is a magician. Does it matter? Shiera glared at me and went into the room she'd picked, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a moment, wondering whether to knock on the door and apologize. In the end, I decided to wait until morning to talk to her, since by then she probably wouldn't be mad anymore anyway, and I wasn't sure what I should apologize for. I kept the sword of the sleeping king with me all night. It was a little uncomfortable sleeping that way, but I felt better knowing where it was. It wasn't that I didn't trust Telemaine. I was just getting more and more worried about the sword. Everyone I met seemed to know about it, or want to know about it, or just want to get a hold of it. I spent a lot of time thinking instead of sleeping. Telemaine served breakfast the next morning on his magic table. He was very quiet while we were eating, but as soon as we finished, he looked at me and said, I have watched the enchanted forest all night, and there are some things you should know. But I do not wish to detain you against your will. What things? Shiera demanded. Telemaine smiled slightly. I fear you will have some difficulty in reaching the castle, he said. I found no less than 12 wizards searching the area between it and you. Oh, great, Shiera said disgustedly. Just what we need. More wizards. I don't think that's very good, the dragon said. Why do you? I don't, Shiera said. Then why did you say so? What can we do about them? I asked Telemaine. I think you can avoid them if you go through the caves of chance, Telemaine replied. And that is the end of chapter 12. Sorry, the end of chapter 13. Next comes chapter 14, in which the dragon has an allergy attack. Sounds like maybe they run into some wizards. Very good stuff. So tune in, remember, next Monday, I will be reading Monday, so that I don't forget and leave it to go for 3 weeks like I've been doing. So Monday, chapter 14, and we'll see you then. Thanks for tuning in this time. Bye.